Good morning. This is the Natural Institute. It's our weekly staff meeting. We are accompanied this week by our dear friend Noah Revoy, Coach Noah Revoy, and he's going to give us a lesson, an introduction to, explanation of. Could you explain?
Yeah, it's a presentation, and what I'm going to explain is what we need to know to have Christians cooperate with us in implementing natural law within Christianity. Probably the easiest way to explain it.
And you know this because
when I was 2 years old, I started training to be a minister, and at that point I was already at 2 years old able to give arguments, and things like this was expected of me, and I trained that my entire life. And when I left my church, I continued to study how humans are programmed, how we come to conclusions, and why it's so hard to convert people. And that was my expertise when I was a minister, was how to convert people. I was trained in that. Why it's so hard for some people to convert people, and why other people say a few words and people all of a sudden convert to what they believe. And I'm going to present that. That's actually the core, is how conversions happen. Because if you can't understand that, you can't really understand Christians.
Great. So I'm going to add a little context, okay? So what I find interesting about you and your work is that for some reason, despite that you came from the church, it's less pseudoscientific and ideological than the other methods that I've seen taught. And so I just find this really interesting. So if there's any way you could sort of put an explanation around that, or have any insight to it?
And if you're listening to this and you know me, you got to listen to the whole thing, or it's going to sound weird in the middle. I am not Christian. What I am is my family has their own family cult. It's ancient. Going back to at least 450 years of recorded history, and it was already there in full swing when they started to record it. And it is the worship of truth, and we see truth through for many generations through Christianity, which meant that we could only accept beliefs that aligned with natural law, and so we could only see Christianity within the framework of what God had created, what was natural and what was real. And so we had to look at it through that lens. And we didn't just look for truth through Christianity. We looked for it through every possible collection of knowledge that we could. And, there was a point where that was mostly philosophy. Then it became science as well. And since meeting you, Curt, you've taught me a lot of ways to use the law to seek truth as well. And that's expanded the tool set I have to find it. And that's why it's so different. Rather than using Christianity as the lens, I use truth as the lens to then view Christianity. And so it comes out very different.
Thank you. Why would that sound weird? I don't know.
I'm not a Christian was the first thing I said.
Well, I would, that's interesting. I'm not a Christian. So that just depends on your definition, right?
Yeah.
Because a thing
exactly.
A thing is determined by what it's not. Right. And so I'm like, well, I have very similar ethics to you. That's why I call you, right, for coaching. Right. And so I would say that it's want to say, well, when you're Christian, it's like, well, you're European, right? There's a certain set of concepts that Christianity is trying to train you to adhere to, right, or to practice, and you do those things, right? So, but what do you mean when a Christian says that? They mean, are you a believer, right? Is that what they mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. What they mean is, do you believe in my brand of Christianity?
Correct.
When a Christian asks you, are you a Christian? They're not asking if you believe in Christ, because by that definition, then I am a Christian.
Yes.
They ask it as, do you believe in my brand of Christianity? And the problem is I can't say yes to that, because first of all, I don't know that they even know their own brand of Christianity. They don't even know the question they're asking. Mm-hmm. And their brand of Christianity may not adhere to reality. Mm-hmm. And so I can't say yes to that question. And so I start off with the other, and then it's not, it's much more complex, because most people, they just say, give me something to obey. Where do I go to obey?
Yes.
Because this relieves them of the necessity to direct their agency in that direction. They can worry about other things, raising their
It's
kids,
also
making money,
removes
whatever.
I mean, we live in a time of extraordinary change, right? And so it relieves you of confusion.
Yes.
Or right, it's very hard to distinguish what the right path to reality will be, and it's worse as your negative reinforcement increases. So I mean, I don't know. We're all smart guys, so we always have. I mean, I have like 20 ideas like now that I could build a life on, right, and make money at, and I can't do them all, right? And the truth is that they would actually all work. But if you talk to a lot of people, they have a lot of ideas, and when every idea they have, they find out was thought of 500 years ago, and it was dumb then too.
Yeah.
Right. Or it was thought of in the previous generation and it failed, or it's thought of in this generation and it failed, right? And so they live in a world of a lot of negative reinforcement. And so, that's just the conceptual world, but socially, maybe they're getting a lot of negative reinforcement socially, and they don't know why, right?
Yes.
Or they're maybe getting it interpersonally, negative reinforcement, right? But what Christianity does, it actually gives you a way to find continuous positive reinforcement in interpersonal, social, and conceptual relations. So it's when I get into this thing of like, well, I mean, are you anti-religion? I'm like, no, I'm anti-lying.
Yes.
But in the sense that people need some sort of framework that they can't that's it's usable at a human scale of intuition and emotion. That's something we all most of us need. And if we don't need it, it's because we've just grown to where we have enough agency and knowledge and ability and resources so that we can get past it, right? I mean,
I describe it as it's a map you create of the world as you go along, and that map is a model. It's not reality. It's what you can comprehend and what you care to remember.
Okay.
And occasionally what you make up, because you got to make some connections that may not be obvious there, and you have to invent those. Well, most people's map of the world is very limited, and if someone can come along to you and say, look, I got a map that takes you where you want to go, would you like a copy of this? They can convert you. Yes. I'm going to take that map now, I'm going to attach that to my map. Where they overlap, I'm going to find out, place it on my map. Or maybe I'm going to throw my map out because it hasn't been getting me where I want to go. I'm going to take this new map and I'm going to use that to get where I want to go. Yes. And this is why you can see radical change happens very quick, because all they're doing is exchanging one map for the other. Right. And so they can change very, very quickly. And the concepts of conversion can be used positively or negatively. It's not that I'm not saying, when I say that this thing is happening throughout the presentation, doesn't mean I'm criticizing it. It's just what happens, and it can be used for positive or good.
Right. So I should have asked you this to start with. Can you just tell the audience what you do, what your job is?
So I'm a coach, and I do two things. I deprogram people from thought patterns and habits that are not getting the things they want, that are harming them, and I help them to program in habits and thinking patterns that take them where they want to go. And that's the simplest way to describe it.
Okay. So just for the audience, there's a sort of hierarchy to these things. You get advisors, you get coaches, you get therapists, you get psychologists, you get psychiatrists, and then you get doctors, right? I mean, there's this, and I would argue that there's a fitness thing below the coach thing that is that you're actually part of too, right? Fitness is part of your thing too. So
yes.
So you
hard to have mental stability without physical fitness,
right? So and there's also a thing like a mentorship, or right, which is a mentor is somebody's trying to help you excel in your career or something of that nature, right? And a coach is trying to, so you're more interested in overcoming obstacles or in creating a success in life. It's more of a positive direction, right?
Yes. Most people are not mentally ill, including people that have been told they're mentally ill.
Right.
They just don't have a very good working map of reality, or a good compass, because you need that compass. That's your moral intuition, and it needs to be trained. You need the compass and the map together to orient yourself. And if you don't have those two things in working order, you're going to behave as if you're crazy, even if you're perfectly sane. And so I help people make sure that their compass is well calibrated and that their map is complete enough for their challenges. They might need things on their map I don't need. You know, I didn't need to know how to look after kids until I had them. I didn't need that part of the map. Then I have kids. I don't need to worry about teenagers. I have a 9-year-old. I'll worry about teenagers in a couple of years. And so we only need the map to go as far as our current demands.
Is that sort of generalized? That's basically an epistemology of life, right? So is that generalized thing something you teach as well?
Yes, I teach them the process of how to do it for themselves,
Right.
so that for the rest of their life, they can extend their own map and recalibrate their own compass. I will say that I don't think recalibrating your compass is completely possible alone. This is why we need other people. If you are on an expedition through wilderness, you have to have at least 2 compasses. This is a basic rule of any orienteering, military or whatever. The reason is you have to compare those at least a couple of times a day to make sure that one compass hasn't become damaged and gotten off. And then you have a problem if they disagree. You got to figure out which one's right. And there are processes to go math you can do to go through that, and you can fix the broken compass. You can reorient. And we need to be doing that regularly with people that are getting success in life in the areas we want. And we go to them and say, obviously your compass is taking you where you want to go. I now have to reorientate mine to match yours so I can get to the place you're at. And that's part of why we need other people. We can't live a life alone.
So there's 2 points you made there that are kind of profound. One is that in psychologists, they call it sharing another person's prefrontal cortex, right? And it turns out to be true, because it's actually really hard I don't know how to describe this. Most of what we do is prediction, right? So if I'm talking to you, I'm unconsciously predicting your response, which gives me feedback. Yet when I'm not talking to you and I'm talking to myself, I'm not getting that prediction that causes a comparison that causes me to reflect on it. And this was hard for me because I'm like very egoistic, right? Like everyone else, right? And I'm very arrogant, and I'm like, well, I can figure it out, right? No, you actually need to have other people just to overcome that obstacle. And so that's why I say one of the things I'd like to reform is therapy, because it's not suited for men, which is something you have mastered, in my opinion. And this is just tweaking its way into the field at this point, because it's generally feminine, and men want to carry responsibility, not avoid it, right? Or avoid the effects of it. And so
we don't want to be anesthetized, which is what therapy is mostly about.
That's correct.
We don't mind pain as long as there's a point to it.
Right. And so to me, I've used therapy my whole life, but I use it like going to the doctor. Right. I use the example when I came back from Ukraine, I left a relationship behind and it really hurt me. Right. It really bothered me. So I went to that. When I started having problems taking care of my mother, I took care of that. Why? Because I don't want to abuse my friends, right? Too much. I mean, I abused you, I mean, a little bit, but I don't want to abuse my friends too much, right? And your family or your spouse or whatever. And go talk to a professional about it, because we're not all that different. We just find pathways to get it wrong different. The other thing,
there's only a few correct solutions.
Yes.
But there's an infinite number of incorrect ways you can go off track.
Yes.
And most of them are way more appealing at first than the ones that take you where you want to go.
Yes.
So it's very tricky.
Yes. The other thing you brought up, which is core to what I think something not only I'm concerned about, but the group is that you started it too, right? You said too. Mm-hmm. So my problem is religion, that's the point of religion, right? Is to provide mindfulness at training, intuitional training at a young age. So my problem is without some sort of formal training, we're just leaving people to be victims of the basically the grind. The market's brutal, right? Well, all markets are brutal. And it's kind of cruel to put people into markets without the tools to compete in them. And so one of the reasons so I want to see if you have anything you could say about the need for what you do or what the field does to start earlier.
Yes, the human mind is incredibly resistant to change. It's actually going to be in the presentation. And the only time we change is when the pain of staying where we are is so intense that anything is better, or we're literally facing death. People hit rock bottom. Mm-hmm. You've probably known someone, you're like, he's not going to change till he hits rock bottom. That's how the human mind is. And very few people, maybe the percent that's the first function people, that 1%, are capable, and even then we don't always do it, but capable of pulling back from not hitting rock bottom before we change. But that's the problem is if you're not raised from an early point knowing how to think, fixing you as an adult is almost impossible. It can be done. I'm going to explain how to do it in this presentation, but it's a lot more work and it's a lot more pain, and you miss decades of your life. You could have really enjoyed your childhood a lot more if you weren't such a dopey kid, you know. And if you know, my kid is incredibly sensitive, so he picks information up, too much information. It almost overwhelms him. If I didn't teach him how to think, he'd be deeply depressed. Because it's like he's very keenly aware of the dangers in the world. He goes into a house, the first thing he does, check everything is dangerous for his little brothers. He's closing the window. He's taking the dangerous potted plant away. He says, you got to put those knives away.
He's got the responsibility instinct down hard.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And that's really tough on a kid. That's really hard on a kid. It's good when you're an adult. It's really hard on you when you're a kid, and you need training to make that instinct into an advantage for you instead of a liability.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what it is. The mindfulness training is about a couple of things. It's about being able to be in the moment you're in and actually doing the task you're doing and not disassociating somewhere else. And the other thing about it is to not overvalue or undervalue your emotions. They're there as a signal.
It's information.
But most of us, yeah, we have anxiety that tells us there's something in the future coming up I need to prepare for. But then what we do is we get anxiety about the anxiety, which makes us sad, which makes us angry that we're sad. And so we got 4 times the emotions we should have if we just went, yeah, anxiety about the future is probably normal if I haven't prepared. I should probably go prepare. And then get ready for it.
I want to capture something. So you called most therapy tries to provide you with, what did you say?
Anesthetizes.
Yes.
Yeah. You have anxiety. Here's how you can forget about it.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work, we got drugs.
Yeah. It's fucking horrible. All right. So I wanted to establish it's really easy to just roll in without establishing the credibility of the individual speaking. I will testify to the credit. I think I said I could testify and I would, you're right, that'd be one thing because you're credible. But I'd rather have it come from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and demonstrated for the audience. So what's our mission today?
Is it possible to do for me to do screen sharing?
I already let you do it.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So share
screen.
Wait,
Rob, can you run a cloth over your lens? Run a cloth over the lens of your camera.
He just liked it. I was gonna say when he was in the car earlier and like the lights were coming through, I was gonna say something. I was like, fine. It's like a little light show.
My screen is smashed to shit. That's what that is.
Oh, okay.
It's terrible.
Foggy Rob. Yeah, it's
Fog Rob.
Can you guys see my presentation?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So I'm just going to frame this for the Christians that are watching. You're probably going to say, well, that's not how Christianity is supposed to work when you see this. And the thing is, I'm not going to deal with what's supposed to be, only what actually is. And that means focusing on demonstrated behavior and what interests we can infer from that. So it may or may not be how it's supposed to be. I'm also going to offer you absolutely no references, because this is really my experience with being a Christian converter. You're also almost guaranteed to go to say, not all Christians are like that. And that's perfectly fine. But if you're thinking that, it's going to distract you from the conversation. And I'll tell you, I know that it's not you and not your church, and you're the outlier here, because you wouldn't be listening to us if you weren't mature enough to hear things that made you uncomfortable and not lose your cool. So I don't think I'll get any knocks outs in the comment. And for us guys, this is about understanding and disambiguating what it means to become and be a Christian, and then how we can help Christians to adhere to natural law.
So that's how you get around the objection right there.
Yeah, we're not trying to convert you from Christian to natural lawism as if it was a religion. This is not a religion. This is a science, as you've said many times. So we talked about who I was. I've been preaching the gospel for 2 years old. I've had decades of training and ministering. My focus was on conversions, and I've been studying deprogramming and programming for years. I'm currently studying hypnotism and how the brain mechanically works with stressors and that kind of thing. And the first topic I want to discuss is conversions. If you don't understand how people get converted, you can't understand the condition they're in post-conversion. Therefore, you can't understand them. Without conversion, there's no such a thing as a religion or a political ideology or even philosophy, because all ideas exist in the minds of men, and you can move that idea to another man's mind, but that doesn't mean he's going to value it enough to continue propagating it. So when you die, your ideas die. And so every successful religion, ideology, philosophy, everything has not only passed the idea on, they have converted the person into believing that idea is sufficiently valuable to continue passing it on in perpetuity. And everyone that we don't know about wasn't successful at that. So there's a bunch of types of conversions. Religion to religion, atheist to religion, religion to atheist, one political type to another, politics to religion, orientation to orientation. I won't talk too much about that, too controversial. There's a civilian soldier warrior conversion where you go through a military process of conversion. You enter as a regular guy and you leave as a warrior. There's diet conversion. I'm in keto and then now I'm in paleo, and people are converted all the time, and their entire belief system about their diet changes overnight. Football club to football club. I frankly think it's easier to change a person's religion than their football club. I live in Portugal, so I had to mention football clubs. People don't ask you. People, when they meet you, they ask you what your football team is. They don't ask you what your religion is. They don't ask you where you work. They don't ask you. It's what's your football club. And on that basis, they will make friends with you or not. Not that, there's not hatred for the other club. It's just like, oh, you're the same club as me. And immediately there's a connection. We have the conversion of, and this actually should start boy, man, husband, father.
Mm-hmm.
It should start with boy. And conversion processes, a coming of age ceremony done right is a conversion process. You're being, the child is broken down and the man arises. And you go through that again as you become a husband. That's what a marriage ceremony is. It's a conversion process. Same for women, and the same for nation to nation. At one point, Americans were British, and they converted over to Americans. And you'll see exactly how that happened later on, because I do mention it again.
One question.
Go ahead.
Just for the audience, because I know someone's going to think of it. Is it you didn't include philosophy or ideology in there, but I assume that's you mean that is politics.
I count them as religions.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say they're either politics or religion. I don't know which one you're going, but I just wanted to answer it to overcome the objection if somebody had it.
Yeah, and you'll see this where you just look to ancient Greece, and you would have a new philosopher come along and capture many of the students of the old philosopher. You can see this in modern psychology when people were, they were Jungians, and then they went and spent time with another therapist, and then all of a sudden their ideas completely aligned with the new therapist. at least while they're there. They convert their ideas over.
Mhm.
And what it is the idea of conversion is that we're taking your identity, your map of reality, and your moral compass and altering them. So everything is altered. You are another person after the conversion. You bear similarity to the original person, but there's differences. We all have an internal model or map of the world, and it's a simplification of reality. And there are three ways that we simplify it. We ignore the things we don't want to see, we delete the things we don't want to remember, and we invent and make stuff up to fill the gaps. And everyone does this, and this is actually essential to our survival. If we tried to pay attention to everything that happened around us, we would be overwhelmed with stimuli and have a breakdown. And so this map of the world is, because it's incomplete and there are things we don't know, we generally remain open to the fact that we might need new information, even if it is hard to change people's map.
Hey, so can I
Go ahead.
I have this thing with map. I have this thing with the map metaphor, because a lot of people use it. But because I use the term weights and measures, which is probably the other end of the spectrum, right? So when you say map, I use the term, they have a bunch of presumptions about the world. They have a bunch of object references. They think these things are causal, and they think there are these relations in the world, and these things are valuable, right?
And this is possible, and this is not possible.
Right. And so you have to, changing all that stuff is actually hard, right? One of the things we talk about is neural economy, right? And so, it takes a while sometimes.
Well, it's exhausting. If you want to drastically change how you view the world, it can be exhausting to you. It's emotionally exhausting. One of the things my father used to tell me all the time, as he was training me to talk to people, is that people's perception of reality is reality to them.
Yes.
And that if you can change reality and it doesn't have any effect on them whatsoever, but if you change their perception, you'll have an immediate effect on them.
Correct.
And that really stuck with me my entire life. And I remember arguing with him about that at first, saying, no, reality is reality. And if your perception is wrong, that's your problem. But that doesn't change the fact that it may be your problem, but it's still real to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes in because the conversions, that's part of the conversion process. It's not just what's real, it's what you think is real. So we alter the map. Oh, wait, sorry. For some reason, we're at the beginning of this one again. Just a second. Okay. So conversions usually happen suddenly. There's often a buildup to it, but the actual conversion is sudden. And this is especially true in men because we're stubborn to make decisions, but when we do, we're very decisive. So we make sudden, and I mean suddenly, it can be in moments or a morning or an hour of it just happens.
Yep.
It's an emotional, not a rational process. We will seek to rationalize it later.
Wait,
I don't
understand.
So for you, Curt, for me, it might be a rational process because we're first function people.
Yeah.
And our primary dedication is to truth. But for most people, conversions are an emotional process.
Okay. So it's valuative first rather than rational first. Okay.
Yes. It's not that there isn't some rationality involved.
Sure.
It's that the process is emotional and then it's justified afterwards.
Correct.
And rightly or wrongly, sometimes it's correctly justified afterwards.
I've had a problem teaching. Sorry. I've had a problem teaching this to therapists my entire life. And I say, look, I just need to understand it and my emotions will follow.
Yeah.
I don't need the justification. Right.
Well, we're like 1% or 0.5% of the population, and they're not trained to deal with us.
They're not trained to do that.
No, they're trained to deal with the 80% that are highly emotional.
They keep talking to you about your emotions, and I'm like, don't worry about my emotions. They'll adapt if I understand, but I can't.
They do what I tell them to do.
What's so funny?
Well, they do what I tell them to do, not the other way around.
Yes.
And again, that people might say, no, my conversion was a fully rational process. And that's how you will perceive it, no matter whether it's rational or not rational. Only an outside person listening to your story can give you an objective view on that.
Yeah.
And then I'm not discounting that maybe the person watching this that has that objection did have a rational conversion. It can happen. And it requires trauma to reset the brain. Now, trauma in a slightly different way than we think. We'll get into that. So trauma to reset the brain, and by trauma, I only mean overstimulation. It can be positive overstimulation as well. Extreme excitement, euphoria. We'll get into it. So there's either the long, slow accumulation of mental and physical stressors. There is very little difference to going over the edge of a roller coaster and being terrified and being excited. What's the difference? I have very low neuroticism because I interpret all threats and dangers as exciting to deal with. And therefore I don't view it as stress. It is a stress, but I view it as something exciting and fun. Oh, another demon to slay, another, problem to fight. This is fun. And I've done that intentionally. I've cultivated that because then I don't view it as negative. I
call it chasing trucks. I like to chase trucks, and it's a problem because I chase trucks until I end up in the hospital. Because I've burnt myself out. So it's most people see stress and fear as negatives, but some of us see as exciting.
Yes,
like the
and that's warrior class and first function see that because if you didn't, you'd run away from battles.
Yeah, no, I like go run at it.
Somebody has to run towards the battle.
Anyway, okay. I just think it's interesting you're hitting on these core issues.
Yeah. So specifically what that could mean is a long illness, slow starvation, deprivation, abuse, repression, imprisonment. I didn't mention any positive ones, but it sounds funny, but running a highly successful company can burn you out. You'd think running a company that's failing will burn you out. No, if it's failing, you can walk away. It's done. I'm going to go away.
It's true.
It's when it's successful that it can stress you out.
Yep.
Or you can have a sudden and intense stress. So war, torture, drugs. Drugs put you in a position where the overstimulation is very easy because it can make you very sensitive to it. Or even a preacher's fiery sermon, about hellfire and all that can scare the heck out of someone, especially if they're impressionable. And here it is, the trauma can be real or imagined. And in fact, all trauma is partly imagined because our opinion of the trauma is not always exactly the way it really happened. And it's unlikely we're 100% accurate. So here's an example. This is John Wolseley. He was a fiery British minister in, I think, the 1700s. And he could preach so effectively to people. He was using hypnotic suggestion. I don't think he knew that. He just did this and all of a sudden it worked. And, he was smart and he gets that feedback loop and he very quickly improves what he's doing. And he could give a speech and people would collapse. They'd go into a catatonic state from so much stress over his preaching. And when they woke up, because they heard everything he said during the rest of their little catatonic state, when they woke up, they were reprogrammed to agree with him. Complete and total conversion that happened in hours.
One of my ancestors is Thomas Doolittle. He wrote 29 books. They're about the same time on theology, and the government tried to get him killed. They chased him.
If you're too effective, they'll go against you because they're afraid of anyone that has greater persuasion power than they do. Here's a Soviet gulag, same thing, only this is low and slow. Well, it's not that low. It's still pretty uncomfortable. But they didn't torture as much as you think. They just made you always totally uncomfortable for long periods of time. And slow starvation, much more effective than 2 or 3 days of fasting. You'll go into euphoria after 3 days of fasting. But you have 6 months during the winter of sub rations, and you're willing to agree to anything to get some more food. Every military in the world uses this conversion process. Every single military, make you uncomfortable, cold, wet, yell at you, tell you you're an idiot, break the man down and build him up. I actually think this is why we have, in the moment, a record number of trans coming out of the US military is because while they're broken down, they inject them with some diversity and inclusion propaganda, and they're in an extremely hypnotic state at that point and very suggestible. And I think this should be considered pretty serious attack on soldiers, actually. It can be positive. These guys are here completely voluntarily. They probably think they're having fun, and they're going to dance.
Wait a minute. So what you're saying is that the reason you break militaries down like that is because they're in nations. And
Yes.
the purpose of breaking it down is to create trust.
Yeah.
And
Think of it this way.
And
You go in,
then they're not replacing it with trust.
yes. Well, you go in to be in the Marine Corps. You come out of it, you're not, oh yeah, I was in the Army. No, but when you come out of the Marine Corps, I am a Marine.
I am a Marine, yeah.
So the Marines are the best at this. They're and they're so good that you identify for the rest of your life as a Marine. They
Hey, look,
change
is that right?
permanently. Yeah, you're
Got a
permanently
Marine down
different. You're permanently different. You're a different man after that. Not just a different skill set, but a different man, which changes your future behavior. And it's actually the most effective way to train military people. Here we have this group of people are going to, this is probably some sort of coming of age ceremony or whatever. They will dance themselves into ecstasy. So they'll give themselves so much physical stressors by dancing for like 24 hours straight that they'll have a little breakdown that puts them in a highly suggestible state. And then you can reprogram them with the expectations that a man now has in this village. You are now a man. These are the new expectations. You're not a boy. Put that stuff away, become a man.
So, sorry, is it okay if I keep asking these questions?
Yes, no, I love questions.
So what I'm hearing, I've got to translate this into neuroscience, right? What I'm hearing is, because the word trauma is, I think I like the word overloading.
Yeah, overloading. Overloading is probably a better way to describe it. In the early literature, they did describe it as trauma because that was just what they were using, but overloading is probably better. Yeah.
Okay. So because overloading puts you into a state of suggestibility.
Yes.
Right. So
yes.
The problem is, how do you overload people into a state of suggestibility? Right.
Well, you tell them that there's a deadly virus that's going to kill everybody. You talk about it nonstop on the news. You lock everybody down in their house where they can't go to their friends to normalize their situation. And then you tell them that, oh yeah, wait, well, now it's kind of over. It's just kind of over. The programming's been done. It's kind of over. And we've just been going through one trauma after the other.
Okay.
Before that, it was terrorism.
So now I've taken
always something.
That was an objection I wanted to take off the table, in case somebody came along with it. So the problem is what I'm hearing is absolutely you're talking about in cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Which is Stoicism, really. It's that's the gradual process of continuous exposure until you overcome it. But what you're saying is, you said the slow way and the fast way.
Yeah, the fast way is actually more powerful and more effective on the majority of the population.
Yes.
And you can do that in as little as an hour. You can completely change a person. You can't get them all the new information for the map that quick, but you can change them to, I believe whatever you believe. Tell me what I believe.
Right.
And almost everyone is susceptible to this if you do not have a very strong personality. Probably none of our guys in this group are, because we're sufficiently disagreeable, but actually I address that later on.
Okay. Thank you.
So every kind of conversion, people are like, why did X group suddenly become this way overnight? Well, look, that group probably just had a load of trauma. And then along comes somebody that's really good at talking and convinces them that this is what they should do about all that trauma. So
I'm just beginning to understand how profoundly brilliant the conversion framing is. It's effing brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the objective is total conscious mind exhaustion, because your conscious mind is what objects. Your unconscious mind does not object. Your conscious mind says, no, but that doesn't make sense according to my current map of the world. Well, if it's not there to object, your unconscious mind just takes it in and says yes. That's all it can do. That can look to people, that exhaustion can look like fainting spells, speaking in tongues, writhing on the floor, mutism, blindness, deafism, shell shock, PTSD, all that kind of stuff. Afterwards, there's a recovery and the finishing of the programming, because they remain in that state for a period of time afterwards. And if you use relaxing drugs, they can stay in that state even longer. Now, with reason is being incapacitated, the mind becomes ready for programming, and it will accept almost any programming, including stuff you would have considered ridiculous a few hours before.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on the kind of trauma. Sometimes there's full reversal trauma. So you'll see the woman who was a prostitute suddenly becoming a completely like chaste woman and completely changing in every way imaginable and hating her past life, or vice versa. You'll see the dangerous, violent criminal have this conversion and suddenly he's peaceful. And this 180 is not unusual, and it depends how the process is done, but that's beyond the scope for today. And here's the scary part. Ordinary people are most easily affected by this method. The reason is the vast majority of people are more interested in getting along with everyone else and fitting in and being the same than they are with truth, and therefore they are very, very susceptible to reprogramming. Malicious reprogramming or positive reprogramming.
Mm-hmm.
The army doesn't put geniuses on the front line for a reason. Because a genius goes, I think that's a death sentence. I'm not going to run into those machine guns. You put ordinary people on the front line that you've programmed to run into machine guns. And it's, you keep your geniuses for more important things. So where does this all come from? Years and years ago, at the dawn of humanity, some woman tells her kid, if you don't behave, I'm going to tell your father when he gets home. But, and there's a reason, we'll get back to the only tell your father in a moment. But with adults, you can really only threaten them with torture, death, or dishonor. There's nothing else you can threaten an adult with throughout most of human history. That did not work well with stronger-minded people or with strong identities, or people who don't care about dying, or might even want to die, or are a little bit crazy. It's also very irregular and slow. Torture is very inefficient. So they don't even use it now to get information. Even the people the only people who do it now are sadists for the purpose of their own enjoyment. This is not done anymore by any government for the purpose of extracting information, because it's useless. Then the Zoroastrians innovated in mind control by inventing hell. Now you could threaten people with eternal suffering. That's way, way, way worse than dying once. You're going to have to suffer for the rest of eternity. And this gave them this new way to traumatize people rapidly. And original sin, hell, constant global warming, nuclear threats, pandemics, lockdowns, all of the isms they can call you. People, I'd rather die than be called an ism. All of these things are punishments worse than death. And this is all the things I wrote about in my book, the GSRM things that we've talked about many, many times that you came up with, Curt. And these are worse than death. Social isolation is worse than death for most people. And so this is what we get threatened with nowadays. And there can be good ones as well. Mutually shared suffering from for a common goal can give you sufficient exhaustion that you come together. And the example is the founding fathers. They had to take this nation of states that didn't like each other very much, and they were able. The trauma of the Revolutionary War is what made America. And I'll tell you, I know exactly that's true, because in Canada they just said, "Oh, here's some freedom," and the Canadians never broke away from the crown. The trauma was necessary to create the United States, because it allowed people to say, my map of the world that includes me as a British citizen, and people were very proud of being British citizens, is no longer serving my needs, and I must rewrite it. And I will become an American. And not just I will become from, Virginian or whatever, I'll become an American. And so it's very important. Women who give birth together, they share a life bond men who fight in wars together, all that kind of stuff. So it can be positive as well.
Yeah, sure.
Where's this here? This is the typical conversion process. So most of the people that convert from one type of Christianity to the other, or that convert from non-religion to Christianity, are on the edges of Christianity. They have a background knowledge of what it is. Then their life hits rock bottom. They get total brain exhaustion. They go numb. They see a church or a revival or something. They go in. There's an emotionally overwhelming speech. There's the promise that, if you just allow yourself to break and surrender and accept Christ, that you're going to be okay.
But it's in a social context.
Yes, in a social context where you see people behind you praying for you, and everyone is super friendly. And I was taught to look for people that were suffering. I was taught to. We kept notes of all the people. People talk about an area study. I had notes of all of my neighbors and everything about their lives written down, so that, that guy got divorced, man, I should go see if he's okay. And it's very pro-social, except it's a little predatory because we were using it to convert people. But but we knew everything was going on, and we recognized that if you just gone through trauma, you were now ready to think about the potential of doing something new.
Yeah, what am I detecting that's not being stated, obviously? So I'm going to go back to neuroscience, and it's like, the sense of elation, right? Elation, I don't know how to use any other term, is the result of the feeling of running with the pack. And so
I didn't know the answer, and then I don't even need to know. I just go with these people. They know. I'll just follow them.
Exactly. And so
it's
it's
so much easier.
It's really low level brainstem reward system. So that's why, it's much easier to convert people we go to football games for a reason. That's the reason.
Yes. We're incredibly social creatures. We need that. And the other thing too is that my life hit rock bottom. So obviously the map I have doesn't work. These guys seem a lot happier in this church. Look, there's families here. There's husbands and fathers and wives and kids and all of this stuff going on. And this seems a lot. They have better lives than I do. Even if they're wrong, they're less wrong than I was. So I'm going to join. These people look like they're better off than me. I'm going to join this group. And I don't know what they're doing exactly, but I'll figure it out as I go along, and I'll become part of it. And so and then that actually makes sense. If you join a group of people that's more successful than you, you will become more successful. And I hope this doesn't seem like I'm like criticizing the whole time. This is just mentioning how it is. And a lot of this needs to be this way because people are too stubborn to change. Well, they're too stubborn to change. It's not.
Well, I mean, it's asking people a lot. That's a lot. Changing your thought pattern is a lot. I mean, most of what your brain does is develop a thought pattern, right? And if you're telling it to go rewire itself for different rewards, that's great. And the best way to do it, which is what I hear you, I'm trying to put the pieces together as you go along, as you're saying, the person has to be either go into or be brought into crisis.
Yes.
Because that crisis has to be open to suggestion. They have to have have some new information, and it has to reinforced by social confirmation, social proof. And that
when I'm working with clients, that's the exact process I use. Okay. I tell them to get rid of all the things that are anesthetizing them. No drugs, no drink. Well, drink is a drug, but no distractions, no TV, no video games, nothing that can program you when you're in this vulnerable state. Don't read the newspaper. Don't watch TV, nothing. Don't even listen to music. And you're going to sit there with your unresolved issues until they break you or you come up with a solution for them. But either way is okay. If your map is okay and you've just been ignoring it, well, then fix your problems. And if your map's not okay, let it overwhelm you. And then come back to me on the next session. And I'm going to tell you how you can fix that. This is extremely effective.
Being traumatized tells you that your perception is broken.
Yes.
You weren't able to predict a negative outcome that puts you in a state that tells you have to reorient your perception, or traumas like this will come in the future.
Yes. And Brandon, you'll like the fact that most of this information is the actual science behind it comes from Pablo and his dogs.
Sure. Oh yeah.
And
Because
he
you can't-
discovered this with the dogs. And
You
that's why
can't
the
talk them
Soviet
into a
Union-
new frame.
Yeah.
Can't talk them into a new frame. I can't
No.
threaten. I can't say, hey,
No.
look, if you run into the street, a car might hit you.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
change their
If you
perception.
can train dogs, you can train the majority of people.
You change their perception. Streets are
Yeah,
dangerous.
Brandon ruined my perception of humanity with this. It's the depth of his, because he keeps saying, well, this is what I do with dogs. And I'm like, oh, I want that. I want to feel like we're special, like humans are extra special. And no.
You are.
Well, this is why the Soviets got ahead of the rest of the world in mind control, is because they were like, well, we already treat humans like animals, so I don't mind this comparison between animal and human brains. And they were able to get 30, 40 years ahead of the US in mind control stuff. All the MK Ultra and all that stuff was the US desperately attempting to catch up. So at the end, you get a new identity. Hopefully this is a new positive identity. You get a new map of reality that hopefully gets you better places than you were getting before. You get a new moral compass, and you get a new mission or purpose in life. And here's the thing. You're not really converted to Christianity. You converted to that church's teachings.
Correct.
And you'll get this intense loyalty and fiery zeal. So it's the new converts that are always the hottest for the church. They're always the ones going after it. And even though I was 5 generations in the church I was in, my family was always like we were new converts. It was just the way we were, but that's not generally how it is. Generally, the new converts are the ones that are the really intense ones. Now, is this church actually teaching Christianity? It doesn't matter to them. They probably have no way of knowing.
Well, there's 200 and some odd Christian sects now. I mean, they all disagree with each other. Doesn't.
Well, here's the other thing. Is it actually good for them? At first, they hardly notice. It's going to take them a while to find out if that new map is harmful or not. This is how people get into cults, and they seem real happy. If you ask them, they're real happy. And the fact that this is so easy to do to people is why society itself has to ban dangerous cults.
Yeah.
Because the individual, like as a society, we can be resistant to it. As individuals, we get into a bad situation, we can be really easily programmed. So why is all of this important? Because we're dealing with masterful human programmers. These are not amateurs, these are professionals. Some of these churches have thousands of years of doing this. If they're political programmers, because this all applies to everything, they have loads and loads of research. They know what they're doing. And because emotional decisions can't be undone with reason, and our favorite tool is reason, and that doesn't work against emotional issues. And if we attack any of the person's beliefs, including ones that even other Christians recognize are irrational, you're attacking their new identity, their new mind map, their new moral compass, and their new mission.
Mm-hmm.
You're attacking everything they now hold dear, and they're at the state of highest belief. It's impossible to win anyone over that way. So is this all good or bad? Well, it depends on what the church is producing. You can only judge a church by the fruits it produces. This is why I don't mention anything in this presentation about theology. It doesn't matter. It does matter to you in the church, but it doesn't matter as far as an external judgment of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Are you producing happy, healthy, fit people who are out having kids, reproducing, and are they following natural law, which is also God's law as well?
Mm-hmm.
And if we do anything, we would only want to target at first the most egregious churches that other churches even recognize are harmful and toxic, not Christianity itself. We're not after Christianity. We're not trying to undermine Christianity. We're trying to undermine the churches that are producing rotten fruit. Jesus said, there'll be some that produce rotten fruit, throw them in the fire. Not saying we should throw anyone in the fire. Don't want to get banned off YouTube as well. So our job isn't to convert Christians. And honestly, who cares what they claim to believe? Like, I will not argue with Christians about things like evolution. There's no point.
Right.
It's only what they do that matters. So if there's behavior that imposes a cost on me, we'll talk about that behavior. And then we have to come up with incentives and things. Their actions are what matter. And then we have to be really clear on what we want done differently. And I think I have a solution in this. I've said this so many times, given enough time, all honest men come to the same general set of conclusions, no matter where they start from.
True.
Oh, my name. The thing is to Christians, truth is holy. It's sacred and it's part of Christ. The difficulty is for them to apply that. Christ himself says, I'm the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So this is a core concept from the Bible, spoken by Jesus Christ, as to who he is.
Yeah, the problem is,
Truth.
what is that? I know what that means.
Yeah.
Right? But how many interpretations of that are there?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. We have to, I interpret this as Jesus came to teach truth.
Yeah.
And that everyone who's not teaching truth is not in line with his teaching.
The truth of what? The truth of what? It's actually the optimum way to behave.
Yes.
It actually is the optimum way of behaving.
Yes.
It's the one and only solution to the prisoner's dilemma, right, of social cooperation. He solved it, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's the science of it, right? The problem is, I am the truth. Does that mean all biblical scripture is truth?
Yeah. Well, and here's one of the ways we can tell. He's saying, I am. It is me.
Yes.
I am teaching you the way and the truth and the life.
By his actions.
By demonstrating it. Sorry.
Mm.
And now the other issue with this is that most churches have switched from the pursuit of truth to the pursuit of justice and goodness and niceness, according to them. And
yes,
the problem is you can really only get goodness through truth. You have to pursue truth. The others are incidental to your pursuit of truth. And this is very, very hard for Christians that have been indoctrinated into brought into churches where that's not the focus. But here, there's the alternative. The devil's the original liar. You belong to your father, the devil, for he's a liar and the father of lies. Jesus says this in John as well. In the same book. Why does he contrast these two? So we now have a tool to use to help Christians understand what's going on. We have to put in front of them this emotional choice. Interestingly, Aaron did something similar to the nation of Israel as they were about to enter the promised land. He says, I put before you these two choices. You can follow the law, or you can do what your ancestors did and complain and whine and wander around the wilderness. But as for me and my family, we're going to follow God. Okay? So we're going to put before them this choice. Do the work of the devil, lying and manipulating, or the work of Christ, standing up for truth. And you notice that these are both actions. Not just being truthful, not just the absence of lying, but the defense of truth. Because there is no neutral ground in this spiritual war. And that's what we're in. We're not going to win the political and all the other wars if we can't win the spiritual war. We need to provide simple tools that Christians can use to identify and avoid lies and manipulation. My book is one example. There's got to be examples also produced from a purely Christian perspective. We need to teach people how to pick a church that's in line with natural law. How do you know that your church is in line with reality? How do you know that it's producing good fruit? And it's really not that hard. And that needs to be promoted by someone who is a very active, zealous Christian, hopefully leading his own church, to use as an example. If you're not demonstrating, it's very hard for you to be taken seriously. We need to provide church leadership with tools to protect, actually should change this, to protect their flock from lies and manipulation, and to teach them the things that we also provide at the beginning. Because we're not going to provide those tools directly to the Christians. They're going to be provided to the church leadership.
Well, before we go,
Yes.
Martin's if I don't want to, I'm not putting words in your mouth, Barton, correct me, all right? But what you've been trying to make the point is that the Jesus lesson is fine. It's all the Old Testament stuff they put around it.
Well,
that-
yeah, this is why we have to teach people to recognize the truth, and it becomes egregious to them to be lied to.
Right.
It's Stephen Molyneux did this with a lot of people. He said, okay, this is how you calculate truth. And he didn't tell you what result you had to have in that. And all of his people, a lot of them ended up here.
Yeah.
A lot of them ended up following you because they were like, oh, truth. And there was this big stampede. People got to a point where they had a visceral, emotional, disgust response to being lied to.
Right.
And that's what we're looking to cultivate. And then let them clean their own churches up.
Right.
Like, we're not supposed to clean their house. Let them clean their own house.
So we're still
just
stuck
create
with
incentive to demand more.
truth about what?
That we're going to have to supply to them.
All right. Because the natural law is truth about what?
It's
But
truth
it's
about
only a
human cooperation.
negativa. It's only a negativa. They
Yeah.
can say whatever they want positiva, right? Yes. Okay, got it. I'm sorry. I just had that open question there and I was trying to run with it.
Yeah, and we have to supply that to them, because if they already knew that, they'd be fine. We wouldn't need to do any of this. This would already be done. And so
you're
we'll
saying,
have to supply
you're
that
saying
to
we
them.
can justify Christianity.
Yeah, I don't like to use the word justification, but yes, what we can do is, that's acceptable.
Well, I mean, I don't want to say justify. We don't
What do you think
have
about
to,
this?
we don't have to attack it.
No, we shouldn't attack it.
Yeah.
This has given me a bit of inspiration because the natural law is, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, natural law is the science of cooperation. And I'm always very interested in psychological angles. And so I was sort of brewing a bit of a series of videos saying, you know, as Luke is always saying, if you can't say no, you're not being cooperated with. And so we're talking about the science of cooperation, and self-esteem is a very important component of cooperation. And what most of the left does is get you to give into their demands by avoiding their negative impositions. But a person of self-esteem doesn't work. You know, if you have sufficient self-esteem, you're not susceptible to GSRM. And so, you know, maybe the whole Christian thing is like, you know, every person is made in the image of God. Your children were born perfect in the image of God. Therefore, this is the logic of and the science of cooperation. Do you know what I mean? Cooperation, Christianity, self-esteem, that kind of tying together.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'm getting a lot out of this, Noah.
Good. So here's what we can offer them, because persuasion is about win-win. It's about exchange. So they can keep their identity as Christians, and in fact, they upgrade it. They go from whatever they were to true Christians, because they're now, and the word true comes before the word Christians when I say that for a reason. They're focused on the truth. We're going to enrich their mind map so that they have a better understanding of the world. We're going to help them recalibrate their moral compass to reality, and help them have a new mission, which is to spread truth and combat lies as Christians. So that's what I have presented so far. That's what I have to present.
So what I got, one other thing I just took away is the social focus of Christianity as a means of unifying lower classes, and the political nature of Western civilization as a means of facilitating the organization of the upper classes.
Yes. Well, if you look to the foundation of the Catholic Church, it had a lot to do with getting the large number of extremely violent and destructive Christian little mini sects to stop fighting each other and stop fighting the pagans and stop fighting everybody and causing chaos, and to educate them into a united entity And therefore, they had to be converted. They had to be all converted into the same thing. Just as a nation, you need to identify all together as the same nation, or you're going to have infighting. In an empire, that's why you have infighting in empires. And so they had to come up with a solution to get everyone to submit to the same basic set of beliefs. And so that was the
well, I mean, I just because I don't want the audience to not understand. So why, what's the problem with, I mean, you've got a tribal society in the Middle East. They're already clannish and tribal. It's not families, clans, and tribes. They're not really nations. So, and they're not really states. And so why, if they come from this background of family and tribal gods, and they're now warring over which one is, why solve it for them?
Well, the Catholic Church didn't solve it for them. It solved it for Europeans. This is why it's founded in Rome, not in Jerusalem. Which theoretically would have made more sense to have that as the central place of Christianity rather than Rome. Why Rome? Why? Because it was the center of governance for everywhere, for basically Europe at the time.
So Nicaea comes about in 330. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
And so they're like, look, this is I'm going to take the economics, right? Rome was always a small population trying to govern a vast territory with an insufficient number of elites, producing an insufficient administration that had to be continuously reinforced by legionaries, right? So the legions had to play Marines, go from crisis to crisis, trying to keep everything under control. So the church figures out, hey, we can create basically a government through religion, which is what these folks want, right? By standardizing this, and we can get it, if we can get everybody to agree on it, that's fine. And then we can afford to police and maintain this order by the way they want to be run, not this very commercial and military way the Europeans run their civilization.
Yes, and it normalized cooperation between the European peoples. And instead of everyone following their own cultural things, you had you're a Christian and I'm a Christian. We agree on these set of basic principles so we can do business with each other. We can get along. We can live in the same general areas. And it created a normalization of relations, which wasn't possible. It was not as easy before that, especially since Rome, as soon as they could expand, would expand, even if it was a bad idea.
America is expanding. It's a bad, even if it's a bad idea, and we're in the same position of we have a new religion, which is Marxism, that's trying to replace Christianity, and what we'd like is for Christianity to just adopt a little more natural law, please. That's really the depth of it.
I firmly believe, now this is my personal belief, this is not part of the presentation for a reason. I firmly believe that all the arguments about theology and all the arguments about differences between Christians that are not peculiar to, like, there are some things obviously that are being done that are not even acceptable in the Bible and would not be recognized as Christian as little as 50 years ago.
Right.
But all of the other disagreements are there to cause to fracture intentionally cohesion between and cooperation between Christians of different denominations.
Mm-hmm.
And that only serves for the self-aggrandizement of narcissistic preachers, as well as others who wish to seek power over Christians. And when I say Christians need to unite, I don't mean you all need to become Catholic or Orthodox or something like that. What you need to do is agree on a set of cooperative rules between each other, because otherwise you will never have power again. And you will be subjected to Marxist communist rule at some point.
Self-created divide and conquer.
Yes.
Right.
One of the things that you touched on, and I think it's important, is the behavioral aspect, right? Where from the frame of Christianity, truth is a behavior. It's not just a concept, right? It's a behavior. And when you look at, the devil being the opposite of that the father of lies, it's not just that the devil is telling you to engage in, degenerate behavior, the devil is telling you to virtue signal positively the degenerate behavior, right? And so the virtue signal itself has become the tool of the devil in the attention market, right? So just the distinction between action is truth and virtue signal is lie, I think is important to acknowledge in this concept set.
Yeah.
So,
and as I mentioned in my book, all manipulation starts with self-manipulation. And what I'm proposing is to help people stop manipulating themselves. And the market, we talk about market incentives. Well, the market realigns. There's a huge incentive to start churches. When I was 15, a church down the street from me, I met the minister from the church, and he listened to what I had to, talk to him to try to convert him. And he says, you're better speaker than most of the ministers that I've had, visit my church. He said, I want to make you a deal. He says, I want to retire. He was maybe in his late 40s, early 50s. I want to retire in another 10 years. He says, how about you take over my church? You won't have to pay. I'm like, I have no money. That was just my first thing to say was, I have no money to buy your church. And he said, it's no problem. What we'll do is I'll own 100% the first year. I'll pay you an income. Second year, I'll own 90 and you own 10. And we'll just work it off like that till I own nothing. And I'll continue to collect. And after a couple of years, you'll do all the work and I'll just keep collecting for a while. His church was a tiny church at the end of my street, and he was grossing $500,000 a year. I'm 44 and I was 15 at the time. That's a long time ago. That's more like $1.5 million now. And I said, well, how much do you work? He says, well, I work like 2 hours a day answering people's calls. And then I do a sermon on Sunday, and then maybe I do a wedding on Saturday. And that was his job, making fantastic amounts of money. So there's a lot of incentive for people to start churches to tell people what they think they want to hear. And I would say that generally at the time, back in the 80s, that worked. Honestly, right now, what I'm seeing is people are so upset about being lied to over and over again that they're hyper vigilant. They don't know how to tell the difference between truth and lies, but they're hyper vigilant to anyone who's being dishonest to them. They're almost viciously angry about it. And a church that's not going to lie to you anymore gives you a foundation now to build the rest of your life. You have protection against the lies. You have a place you can go where people are telling you the truth. And there needs to be that incentive again to tell people the truth. There will always be, the best ministers will do it not because of incentive, but because that's who they are. But that's not enough. There's not enough of those.
Well,
it's just that there's not enough truth that say the truth because it's who they are.
My view is that along those lines is that the academy's been captured. The academy education system has completed its takeover of the church that it started back at the time of Darwin. And it's taught a new secular pseudoscientific religion that's actually harmful, which is weird that Christianity is theological and it's actually constructive, because it basically turns everyone into a goddamn customer. And so you treat everybody with customer service, which is basically the extension of kinship love to non-kin. Right, which is the whole point of Christian religion, which is why Christian civilizations get wealthier no matter where Christianity goes, because it's basically teaching you how to solve the trust problem by acting to create trust. So my view is that the only way to fix this problem is institutionally. And what you're suggesting, I can't figure out if you're suggesting this. I want to ask you. Is it possible to create an extra institutional competitor that would actually do this? And I'm kind of concerned that they'll attack it.
I wouldn't do that. What I would do is I would start going to the church leaders that are amenable to this, that are already seeking to be honest with their flock and are seeking to teach them truth, and say, we've got tools to make this easier for you. We've got tools to protect your flock against propaganda of all sorts, against attack against their children in school that's trying to brainwash them into thinking they're things they're not. We can give you defenses for this that you can then share with your flock. We can teach you the psychology of it and how it works. and arm you, as I said, like a arms dealer for the soul. We can arm you to be able to successfully combat this with your flock. And you will see those churches grow massively. Other churches will continue to copy them, and will continue to offer that to people, because really it's the local church leaders that decide whether people go to church or not.
Can they do it? I mean, have we degraded the? I mean, it used to be that. I mean, one of the reasons for the English success in the intellectual era, is if you had a smart person that they needed to be supported, you took them out of the academy, you stuck them in a church, and the guy basically got to be paid to do whatever the heck he wanted, with a few church duties, like you just said. He wasn't necessarily the priest; he was just a guy that, another what do you call it? Another clerical agency. You got a lot of results out of this. And so, but then in New England, one of the reasons New England went as Anglo in the first place, but the other reason is that, who the heck is giving a sermon? It's the most educated person within 100 miles, right? That's who's running these churches, and they're running the churches like a mayor runs it, the most educated person.
Yeah.
What I'm worried about is I don't see that talent in the church. Are you disagreeing?
There is not enough of that talent currently. What we have to do is, this is when they did the reconquest of Iberian Peninsula, they had this little tiny foothold at the top on both sides, and they said, well, that's enough to get started. We got a toehold in we're going to take that toehold and we're going to reinforce it, and then we're going to get one more layer of cities around that, or villages, and one more layer around that. 700 years later, they took the whole entire peninsula back. The communists did the same thing. At first, there was violent opposition to those concepts in Western society. Yeah. And what they decided to do is, we're not going to directly challenge you. We're going to infiltrate you. We're going to be slow and steady, and we're going to make this a 100, 200-year project. If we think we can take it back in a generation, I think we're fooling ourselves. We will do massive change in a generation. We'll establish safe spots for those who want to be out of it, but full victory is going to take a while. Okay. We didn't get here quick. We're not going to get out quick.
I'm Napoleonic, right? I look at the field of opportunities and I say, you move all of them forward by whatever the cheapest move forward is. And so, of course, I'm interested in direct assault by legal means, right? The legal system, and then common lawsuit against the state.
Well, and we should be combining all of these, but not necessarily you working on all of these. You
correct.
Working on the ones that are most efficient, and we get other people working on the ones that might take a little while.
Right,
but overlapping fields of fire.
But that means that we need to flesh out your.
We also share a lot of enemies, meaning there's a lot of overlap in doing the work that needs to be done. Churches can pull kids away from the public school and school them, for instance, and then help the people make a suit against the school, offset the tax burden of having to pay the school while it's harming your children. And we can support
half the kids in Catholic schools aren't even Catholic.
Yeah. I love Catholic school. I can't understand why having gone to Catholic private and public schools, there's no comparison. It's simply because they maintain moral order.
Right? They're also often run by people who have they're part of a religious order, and they're dedicated to that order. And so their calculation system is different. They're thinking in much longer time periods and terms and everything than a regular teacher who just wants to get her paycheck and go home.
Who else? Oh, of course, I went to St. Francis Xavier, which is Xaverian Brothers. And this Vivek, what's his name? Ramashawam, whatever his name is. So I looked at his education. It's the same thing. It's funny because he's Indian, but he sounds like a Catholic, right? An educated Catholic. So I just don't understand why anybody would go to anything but these schools because there's just so much less anxiety in them. All right,
Well,
so
and, yeah, I think they will continue to get more popular now, especially the parent right movement is just taking off in the States.
yeah,
It's where the gun rights movement was in the 70s.
yeah.
And the gun rights movement won everything they wanted to win. We're that close to the NFA Act being declared unconstitutional.
Yeah.
The suppressors, I think yesterday were declared to no longer be regulated by the NFA.
Right.
Or the ATF.
Which make
They're
no,
just like a scope now.
which if you look back at where they started it, the original impetus was because they didn't want hunters in the what do you call Appalachian region to get away with more poaching than they were actually getting away with. Right, that was the whole motivation. There wasn't anything else. And if you ever shot weapons with silencers, they're not silencers, they're suppressors, right? It's just way less harmful for your ears. I'd have gone the other way and say, well, if you want to do anything, regulate that they need to be suppressed because it's too harmful for everybody. And they're not.
They do that in the UK. They do that in the UK. Most of the UK is suppressor only zones. You're not allowed to fire your gun in that hunting zone without a suppressor. It's required. Which
is awesome. Anyway, so you were making your point, and I didn't want to distract you from it, which I tend to do. Sorry. But you were making the point that the parents' rights movement is.
Yes, it's growing the way that the gun rights movement had been growing, and what that means is that we can start talking directly to parents, and when we can start talking directly to parents, we're not just going to talk to them about like how is your church supporting your children ability to protect their identity. Right. We can talk to them about all kinds of things. We can start. We want to install our own healthy programming in people, our own antivirus programming to combat the criminal viruses that have been unleashed on the public. And we want to give them those tools directly.
So the next, I know you're somewhat tangentially involved in this. So what about the men's rights movement? How is that doing?
So the problem with the men's right movement, I think it's been fairly infiltrated at this point. Quite a few of them have been found out to be working for federal agencies currently with the objective of undermining the movements. So this stuff comes out in various ways, and
so that's we have to do that through the court process, then, right? I mean,
yes, the men's rights movement has become all about sensationalism and clicks and selling stuff.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
it's generating.
It's unfortunate.
Well, I don't know. Again, I'm on the. When you're talking about long waves, I'm an economist, basically an economist, right? So I look at how information and populations organize slowly over time, and what I'm seeing is a counter reaction to feminism that needed to happen. I mean, I was thinking about this in the 90s. I'm like, this is not right. I mean, it's going to be the early 2000s. I can't get I'm old enough that I'm confusing my decades. And so in the early 2000s, I was thinking, the market for affection is being destroyed, right? And that means the market for relationships is being destroyed, which means the market for families is being destroyed, which means the market for producing children whose primary function is to be able to maintain a relationship and a family in an intergenerational family. So I'm just looking at this cascade happen. And I said at the time, y'all feminists are all wonderful. You got to understand, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And you may be under the illusion that there's a better compromise than marriage, right? Because what's going to happen is we'll devolve back to most people are screwed by not being screwed. Then you get some people who are in situationships, and then you get other people who are in serial monogamy relationships, and then you have a small number of people, mostly wealthy, successful, educated, high agency people that have marriages. But what's going to happen is those people who are successful in marriages are going to get richer, and everybody else that's in a less stable household, because now it's two households instead of one, right, are going to get poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer. So I mean, so what I'm asking is there any, are we seeing the equal and opposite reaction because of this overreach, overzealous, clickbaity, whatever happening in the manosphere?
Well, what's happening is the best way to undermine any kind of a movement, including enemy movements, is to allow them to run their course and go to their full conclusion, to their ultimate ridiculous ends. And some parts of the manosphere, and this has been talked about by other people in the manosphere, and some parts of the men's right movement have gotten to the point where it's Jerry Springer with a new generation.
Yeah,
It's goofily. There are shows on YouTube where, you know, they bring a bunch of prostitutes in and then ask them what they think about men, and this is just a joke. There's nothing to do with real women.
Right.
On the other hand, feminism has done something similar. They've gone so far that on the regular, I'm 44. I have women in their late 20s approach me, talk to me. After an hour of talking, they say, my mom and grandmother got totally screwed by feminism. And they'll say, well, I'm not against rights and things like that, but everything they said was wrong. Everything they did was wrong. And we should never have gone to work, and we should have stayed at home and had kids. And if you're up to it, I'll do that with you. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm already married. And they're like, oh, mistress, you know, acceptable. We're in Europe.
The problem is you're happily married. You couldn't give a damn about a mistress.
I'm trying to give these girls, like life advice. And they're like, oh, a man. And I've had them say this exact same thing to me. You are a man. Boys my age are not men.
That's right.
The problem with younger men is not just the lack of opportunities, it's the lack of development. Right. And they can do something about that if they know there's help available. If they don't know it, if you don't know the help's available and you search for it and can't find it, that's different.
Okay,
but there's an internet now.
So I'm still trying to see if there's an insight to be had here. I mean, you're providing insights, but the
insight is that we don't need movements to fix our own life, but we do need movements to stop the incentives that are destroying the lives of the low agency people. And since we're all in the same boat together, pulling us down as well.
Right. Okay. So the question I have is that both of these movements had add to equal extremes. What generally happens is that's called market collapse.
Yes.
Right. Can we see the incentives for actually being an adult that can form a relationship in a family? Can we see that return? Or will the industrial age continue, and we will return to serial relationships and a minority of monogamous relationships?
I think, unfortunately, we've deviated so far from the cooperative trifunctional system that we're going to end up into a bifurcated system. And you're either the 1 to maximum 10% on top that get married, stay together, have kids, and start your kids off married young and having kids, or you're going to be at the bottom and you'll be very similar to a peasant from the Middle Ages who also had serial monogamy. That was pretty common amongst peasants in the Middle Ages.
The majority where things were done.
Yeah, partly because a lot of people died young, but partly just because divorce, you weren't really married, you just lived with a woman, and that was common law marriage. Yeah. And then when that didn't work out, you lived with a different woman. And so they, long as you could provide value to the other person, there'd be somebody who'd want to live with you. But that also meant back then that women provided a tremendous amount of value to a man. It was almost impossible as a man to live on your own. You're working all day. Who's going to clean your house, cook your food, and iron your shirts and stuff? You got to work. And so you needed a woman. Nowadays, if I was a single man, I can have a full-time maid and cook for about 4 hours of my work every month. And sex has never been easier to get if you're decently good looking and not a creep. And so, you got sex, you've got your house clean, your food cooked, your clothes looked after. And so there's low incentive for men to get married. And it's actually women that are right now with the situation where they're the ones starting to realize they got screwed out of it because they're getting replaced. Right. Also, too, the number of men who have just simply dropped out of the sexual marketplace means there's about 2 eligible women to every man. Mm-hmm. And so I actually think the reversal is going to come from women going, I want to have kids. I don't want to have kids with a boy. I want to have kids with a man. And I don't really want to be a mistress. Or maybe I just can't, because not even that's acceptable to happily married men. Therefore, I demand things go back to the way they were. Put us back in the kitchen. You know?
I think it's going to be a distribution, but yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a problem is that if women aren't taught mindful, like men need to be taught mindfulness in order to seek responsibility and accountability, which is what they naturally want. It's no way they're going to be happy, but they need to be taught mindfulness. Women's version of mindfulness consists a great deal of not trying to consistently seek attention. And so there's too many women that are basically in a world where they can seek a lot of attention until they can't. But when they've done that, they've burned their opportunity cycle, and now it's harder and harder for them to get attention. But they're pretty self-sufficient women, really. I mean, so if you look at them, they do well self-sufficient. And it might be true that men aren't men are economically self-sufficient, but they're not as happy being self-sufficient.
No.
And so anyway, I just wanted to see if you had any particular
Well,
insight.
most of the men I know that do that thing that I said, where, you know, have a maid and don't really need a wife and just find women and alternate. They're not very happy with that. Like, they can do it.
I've had a wife, a $45,000 a year nanny, housekeepers, you know, people who mow the lawn, right? It's only because my time is too valuable to do.
Yes.
I can't afford to do all those things, right? It's a very poor use of my time. But even living in Ukraine, I had housekeepers, and I had two, right? Housekeeper and a person to cook, and then I had my girlfriend, and you know, and that was a pretty good environment. And it's crazy. I mean, I would have been just fine with the housekeepers and such, and the cook, right? Been awesome.
Yeah, no, it is. Well, and most men, the number one reason men get married is to have children.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's very little incentive for men to marry nowadays. And so what I always tell women is, if you want to get married, be what would make a great mother, and make that obvious. Demonstrate it.
Right.
And
I mean,
the number one
my
reason,
kid, I'm because of my background, right? I'm always living
Yeah.
around the world and whatever. I'm not really. I have basically almost no contact with my kids. I don't really have a relationship with them. In that sense, I'm a terrible father, right? But but however, the joy I get out of knowing that they exist, I can't compare that to anything.
Yeah.
If I knew now what I knew then, what I know now, I'd have had a dozen goddamn kids. Because it's awesome.
it's a fantastic thing, and men that can afford it will. And I think what's going to happen is, since at the moment a lot of men can't afford kids, those that can, it will become a status issue.
Yes.
I have high status, therefore, because I have 8 kids or 10 kids.
You don't realize, I mean, we've forgotten that if you have 4 or 5 sons, you have an army.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I talk about this guy in Ukraine he's not that old. He has 350 people in his family now, right? Because they have big families. They live they basically have a town, right?
Yeah.
And if they want to build a house, they'll bring the family over and they build a house. Right? It's just amazing.
Where I live, not very far from there, there's a small town, mostly ex-fishermen. A lot of them do construction now. Everyone's relatively poor. The girls get married between 16 and 18, and the boys are between 18 and 20.
Yep.
And you get married, your parents provide you with a house, which you and her father renovate together. Maybe your dad as well, because so many of them work in construction. You'll buy one of these cheap little rundown houses and renovate it yourself, and you've got your 800 square foot starter home.
Right.
And they'll make sure you got enough money, everything you need. Because what the parents said is, like, my kid's going to be living at home where I'm going to be feeding them, or they're married and they're living there and I'm going to be feeding them. So for a couple of years, I'm going to help them out. By the time they're in their mid-20s, they're okay with themselves. Yep. Those couples, by the time they're 30, are way far financially ahead of the young men and women that don't get married.
Well, especially when you realize,
and they've usually got 4 kids by then, and they're still ahead financially.
Right. but so that's the value of coastal locality. But
Yeah.
secondly, it's the value of non-urbanization, right? But the third thing is that you're not paying that cost of the house in education, higher education, that actually doesn't do anything except give you permission to enter the job market.
Yeah.
Whereas if we had better education and we had the German method of education, which would mean some far smaller number of people went to higher education because we'd have so many sort of apprenticeship programs, that the kids wouldn't be basically foregoing a decade of consumption and childbearing in order to pay for college that was nothing other than a permission to enter the white collar workforce.
Yeah, if you think about it, if things get real bad, would you rather your child be a master carpenter or a master welder or an accountant or have a degree in sociology? You know, I want them to be the three things that come in handy when things get bad is the ability to hurt people, the ability to help people, and the ability to break and fix things.
Yes, exactly.
So you're either a shooter, you're a medic, or you're a constructor, and that's all that matters. And everything else goes out the window.
Well, I mean, so okay. I don't want to get too far off. So back to your PowerPoint. It's not done. Yes. What do you want to add to it?
So that what I wanted to add is that we then need to operationalize that concept of reaching out to those people who are the influencers in spirituality, the ones who are aligned with truth, the closest ones to us. And we don't need to convert them away from Christianity. We need to demonstrate to them how they can more fully fulfill their vow to Christ as ministers by being more truthful and less and teaching their people how to avoid the lies and manipulations that are a danger to the flock now, because they're not competing with other Christian churches. They're competing with wokeism.
Yep.
And we have the tools to protect them from that. And if they want our protection, we'll teach them how to do it. Then they have our tools to use. And then once you have that network built, then that network can serve other purposes in the future. There is a long point in Western history where voting was completely organized through the pulpit. Political power came through the pulpit to a certain extent. Churches voted all together. And we have that. If we have that network of churches that are aligned with natural law, how do you think those parishioners are going to vote? They're going to at least try their best to pick choices that are aligned with natural law.
I mean, that's one example of how politics is, or how culture influences politics, like the way that the community leaders can help to influence and steer the voters in a system like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, power basically limits who you'll be able to vote for.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and I completely discount state elections and up. They're controlled at this moment. What I do can't consider is local elections are much more important. And the worse things get, the more you rely on your local government.
Yeah.
There's a natural disaster. A couple of weeks later, maybe some lower politician, some lower down guy from the federal government might come by, and maybe 6 months later you'll get some money, a payout of some sort. But your local government's on the scene immediately because they're there as well.
It was logical during the original colonies saw not only opportunity but safety and security in the westward expansion. Right, and that was not just economic opportunity. That was those effing Europeans, like they screw up everything. Right, that was their. Americans thought of Europeans the way that Muslims think of Americans, right? They're always starting some problem. So there was a reason for centralization right, for that kind of activity. There was a reason for some centralization to execute the world wars. But the problem is we've populated the damn country now. We have, 11 nations, right? Three major races, and at least 11 nations among them. And so what's happened now is that because of all that scale and all these people and all this power distance is too high for us to have any meaningful effect at getting our preferences. So we need to restore local government back to what I would think of as Little England, right? Whereas our locality is where most of what happens. And what only thing we're worried about at broader scale is for the resolution of differences rather than the function of anything. In other words, the government. You're looking for dispute resolution, not governance, right? Because they can scale. So it's a normal sequence we're going through. It's nothing bizarre. Just like it's normal to build empires, divide into nations, and develop federations, right? I mean, it's a normal cycle for us to go through. All right, so you would like to take your work a little farther on that presentation. Do you think you could see any group of people starting to go out and work with the churches? Can we do that?
If I was living in the US, I would probably go and do that myself. What we need is someone who is a Christian to reach out to other Christians and to do that. And I don't know who would be best to do that. And honestly, the preachers who'd be best to do this are not probably well known in the public because they're not seeking their own self-aggrandizement.
Right. So we have to find.
That's why it's hard to find them.
I've talked about that, like about how to interface with Christians, how to talk with them and so forth. I kind of agree. Like if you're kind of in their sphere, it's good, but how do we even find the people that can do that, or how do we reach out to them? Like Curt asked earlier, one thing I talked about is as an alternative, or really as a side-by-side effort, we're reaching out to the influencers and the leaders already out there in their church communities. But I do see room for an emergence of kind of a new competitor, like a natural law inspired religion. This is something I've been kind of playing with for a while. So that is a thread that we could continue to develop as part of that effort potentially.
I had planned.
Yeah, there are people who are not Christian who have left their church. Many Christians have left their church. They still identify as Christians. They have left their church, and we don't even need to create an actual religion. What we need to create is a way. My family didn't go to a church. They were their own church. There was a couple of hundred of them in an extended family, and that was their own church. And the elders of the church were the fathers of the family.
All we need is a connection.
How do we recreate that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but you can't find a church where you live. There isn't one. This is how you can be at home and teach your kids and protect your kids. There's theology. You can go get that how you like. There is natural law. This is how you can do that and protect your children.
Yep.
But again, the problem is we really want to reach out to influencers because this amplifies our reach.
Yep.
And that is the difficult thing. Who are the honest influencers in the churches at the moment? You'd have to go find churches that are growing, that have families, that have men in the church. There's almost no men in any churches anymore. Men just don't go to church because it's become so effeminate.
Yeah.
If you can find a church with men in it, you've probably found a church where the church leaders are amenable to these ideas.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Maybelline.
So when you say that, I had a couple of things pop up. I'm running out of we're going to run out of time here soon, aren't we?
Yeah, I got like 10 minutes left.
Okay. So, one is that, does that mean that churches are past, in other words, they've passed the point of recovery? Or
there was a bump in church attendance, and I believe this is going to go down the other side because people went back to church and went, oh, now I remember why I left.
Yeah. And so, my argument would probably fall in with yours, which is you'd rather recapture the institution than try to create a parallel one. Okay, I think that's probably what it.
Yeah, like someone's got 2,000 year head start on me. So
I mean, the
but if
institution's been captured by the academy, but the
Yes.
academy's been captured by an alternate religion that's false. So
Yeah.
why not recapture the church, right? I mean, that's
why don't we get our friends to fight our enemies?
yes. All right. Well, so did you feel like you made your case during this?
Yes. I think I made, and the important part that I think that came out of it is two things: that we understand how people are becoming Christians, and the other is that we don't need to de-Christianize them. We don't need to convert them to something. We need to help them see that in order to live to live as Christians, they have to be dedicated to truth as well.
Right. And that's how they defend against the enemy.
Yeah. It's how they defend against the enemy. That's how they protect their children. And that's how they ensure that their church isn't consumed by the coming woke wave.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in how you were talking about overloading people. And obviously, when you control the state apparatus and the media, it's easier to do. But are there any methods of overloading available to us?
Yeah, if you want to overload yourself, I'm not going to recommend psychedelics because I don't know enough about them. But if you want to overload yourself, stop all forms of entertainment for about a week. Don't do anything that's not an absolute requirement of your life, and just be alone and quiet. Every religious order requires the monk, nun, whatever, to go through a period of silence where they don't talk and they're not talked to. And the reason is because all the things in your life that you've been repressing will come out all at once and overload you. And you'll either be forced to deal with them, in which case you won't get overloaded, but you've dealt with them. Your map is okay. You don't need to update it. Or it'll crush you and you're going to have to update your map to fix it. And what that means is then you need someone that you can talk to talk you through that process. That's what I help people with.
No, I meant, how can we overload other people?
Oh, how can we overload other people? There was this really prominent Austrian speaker who was very good at it a few years back. But yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
oh, now I get it.
yeah, this Austrian fellow.
Oh, so that went right over my head. Okay.
Yeah,
I
I missed it for a second. Yeah.
This
You
Austrian
said a few years ago. I'm thinking a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few years back. And yeah, he was very, very good at it too. The key is you have to work people up into an emotional state. They have to be worked up into a sufficiently emotional state. So if I was doing this at a men's retreat, I would have you guys, we would do a day of fasting. We do a night vigil where we did jumping in frozen lakes and then stand in front of the fire till we're warm. And maybe the next morning we punch each other in the face and have some boxing rounds. And I would work you guys until you were sufficiently uncomfortable that you were reprogrammable. And then we would do the reprogramming. My son, when I went up to Sweden to do coming of age ceremony with him, and I had things planned that would have helped him get into that mode. Well, what ended up happening is that he got really, really ill. And so he suffered without me having to do anything for 3 days, which was highly efficient. I didn't have to do anything. And at the end of the 3 days, he went into a trance mode on his own. And when I came back, he was much more responsible and grown up, and he had made some big changes.
Hell yeah.
And it was because of it, because I remember I said severe illness can do it as well.
One of the benefits we have, one of the benefits we have available to us right now is people are in a perpetual state of overload.
Yes.
So everyone's very programmable right now.
Yeah.
So if you come in with solutions that are better than our opponent's solutions and attach your programming to those solutions, you can leverage their existing overload.
Yeah. Yeah. They're that close. We just need to just nudge them. And then, as you said, bring in our programming. The ideal is if we can nudge them and then they go into overload and we pull them away from all other forms of programming so they don't get cross-contamination. We have to be careful with this. If we put ourselves into a state of susceptibility, not to program ourselves to do things we don't want to do. Because we can get that out, but it's a pain in the neck. Now, I had a load of programming about money that I had to get rid of. That was really hard.
Yeah. Our work is really via negativa, right? It's insulation from falsehood.
Yep.
Right, so that should go well with the I am truth, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I propose this idea of a separate initiative that is more via positiva focus to complement that. And that's how I'm starting to see it as a separate initiative, but it is of course related. So that's kind of part of this culture ops like idea.
There's a tendency in movements to try to get bigger and bigger by everybody doing the same. That's actually counterproductive. What you want to do is, I mean, we already have it. Is I work on, Brandon works on politics, I work on law, Noah works on psychology, and Luke works on basic psychology, right? Basic fitness. So I mean, Rob's starting out to do something, which I'm sure is going to be successful because he's freaking adorable and smart. And Martin, of course, runs our social media. He's basically teaching everybody full day. So we have other people on here too that are not with us today. So I mean, it's better that we divide up the problem into people, because the truth is that most great stuff comes from an individual rather than from a collective. And so if we can just get a group of people that are individually motivated by their own enthusiasm, leadership, and charisma, that's different from trying to create a herd that follows us. And we don't want the herd. We want.
But the organization can obviously like support and empower and enable people to do individual greatness, and I think that's really what we're achieving here.
I just dumped something in the
Go ahead, Bart.
I just dumped something in the Signal chat because I was driving home from my gig and I was listening to a couple of Australian guys do a podcast, and they're pretty hilarious. And Joel is one of them, Joel Davis, and he talks to this other Australian guy, but he had a bit of a monologue too about how to create fanaticism in followers, and it was quite informative. Maybe you guys could just check it out.
I will,
if you're interested. But yeah, it was quite informative, and it was referencing the Austrian a little bit, and some of those techniques really just hammering in us and them. They're the evil people, you're the good people, just really moralizing people and trying to create fanaticism in followers. You had a pretty good input about it.
Right. All right, no, I don't want to go over. You've given us 2 hours of your time. I just want to thank you. Anybody else got any good thanks to give? Because we all thank him or thank.
I love it. I mean, yeah, that's very much the stuff that I'm interested in. So I love it, Noah. I love what you're doing.
All right, guys.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm looking forward to hopefully at some point in the next year getting together with all you guys in person, because that's a whole. I love being with you on video, but in person is always better.
A different thing, and
oh yeah,
we'll try not to get in trouble. All right, this has been an interview with Coach Noah Revoy. It's our Thursday, June 15th staff meeting. I'm going to end the recording now. And please like, subscribe, bell, leave comments, and provide us any insights. Thank you.